So much more for our universities to think about. Well, let's take a look now at the impact of COVID on more vulnerable people in Wales and how for some it has actually presented opportunities of a sort. This time 3 years ago, there were around 50 people sleeping rough on any one night in Cardiff, and the number across Wales was rising as well. Since lockdown, the situation has changed dramatically. But before we explore that, let's remind ourselves of what it was like in 2017. Three years ago, we shared the stories of a number of people who had experienced being homeless and struggled sleeping in hostels, tents and on the streets. Many said they just wanted to work and have a roof over their heads, but finding permanent solutions seemed far out of reach. Fast forward to 2020, and the streets of the Welsh capital are almost empty. Homeless people have been housed in emergency accommodation, including hotels during lockdown. But what's happening now the measures have eased across most of Wales? And what's the long-term plan for the future? Well, to try to answer some of those questions, we've been to see where former rough sleepers are living now and how the future looks for them. Our correspondent Richard Morgan reports.
I got beaten up in my sleep 3 times by a certain person, one person.
The contrast between Emma's existence on the streets and her life now is striking. She has 3 meals a day and a place to call her own.
It's just you got your own little, you can come in, lock your door, you know you're safe, Brilliant, you got your guards by there, yeah.
For the last 2 months, Emma's been living at Mission Court in Newport, a secure compound with 15 self-contained living units. As well as a roof over their heads, each resident is assigned a support worker to help with needs like benefits and medical appointments.
I've got on my methadone script. I got a key worker, I got my key worker Tracy, I got my key worker Lisa, good as gold, from the Wallish Clifford. They're great, brilliant.
Emma is one of over 100 rough sleepers who've been rehomed since the pandemic. Newport Council says it's now funding more self-contained accommodation and claims the Mission Court model works.
What we've seen from this is that people are more able to sustain just living in that temporary accommodation for longer periods of time, and more people are able then to move on to permanent accommodation, which is something that we really want.
In Cardiff, this hostel is now a home to the city's rough sleepers. More than 100 homeless people were moved here in March. Some have done so well that they're on the brink of moving into permanent accommodation.
I'm going to miss all my friends and I'm going to miss all the staff that's been looking after me since I've been here. Because I'm moving soon, so I'm going to be missing all my friends and plus the staff.
But despite the positives, Sally and other residents say they're concerned about the extent of drug use in the hostel. There have been 2 deaths here since homeless people moved in. Cardiff Council say 56 people are receiving substance misuse treatment. Despite the problems, this councillor claims there's a sea change in how homeless people are being treated.
What we're looking at is reconfiguring many of the hostels, taking on new hostels, so that we're actually providing self-contained units and services on site. We will be able to actually allocate individuals to hostels where they get the right support and which fits their needs, because previously we've just been housing people in the next available accommodation, and clearly that hasn't worked.
Both Cardiff and Newport councils say they'll need more money to keep these schemes going, but with the economic picture looking gloomy, that could be a challenge. During the pandemic, the authorities have largely succeeded in getting homeless people off the streets, and it seems the political will is there to keep it that way. But with a recession looming, the pressure on services like this looks likely only to increase. Richard Morgan, ITV News.
To discuss the wider issues raised by Emma and Sally's experiences, I spoke earlier with Katie Dalton from Cymorth Cymru, the umbrella body for those who support homeless people in Wales, and I began by asking her if she agreed that the temporary accommodation seems to have solved the most immediate problems.
It's really important to pay tribute to the extraordinary efforts by local authorities and support providers across Wales. The numbers of people who've been kept safe by being brought inside and given the support that they need is absolutely fantastic, and it's really important now that we make that count to make sure that we move towards people moving into permanent accommodation where they can settle down and live their lives to their fullest.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Is what happens next? How quickly can people be moved into permanent accommodation and also have their support needs addressed? What is the solution to that?
We believe that taking on board the Homelessness Action Group's report and recommendations is really important, that Wales should be setting out a vision towards moving towards rapid rehousing over the next 3 years. And that means much less reliance on temporary and emergency accommodation, making sure that people are moved as quickly as possible into scattered, dispersed permanent accommodation in their area of their choice with that wraparound support. We need lots of things to make that happen. We need the Welsh Government to commit to sustained capital and revenue investment so that local authorities have the funding they need to do the job. We need to see a transformation in services. We need much more social housing being built, being able to access more housing in the private rented sector, and importantly that commitment to providing support for people, because we know that having a roof over your head is one thing, but it's really critical that we have multi-agency support that can help people to manage their lives, their tenancies, and thrive and reach their aspirations in the future.
Well, first of all, on the issue of the housing stock that's available, the Welsh Government have said, on top of the money that they provided to ensure those people weren't on the streets, £2 billion worth has been put forward to increase the supply of permanent housing this Senedd term. Is that enough to address the problem from here on in?
We certainly welcome the leadership and the funding commitment that the Welsh Government has made this year. That's really, really important. But we know that we need sustained funding and commitment beyond this year. So we'll be looking to the next Welsh Government budget, but also to Assembly election manifestos in the future to make sure that we have that long-term commitment, because without that we're not going to have the social housing that we need, and we're not going to have the levels of funding for support that people so desperately need as well.
And the problem is that support is still going to be needed, whether they're in the temporary accommodation or the permanent accommodation. So you talk about rapidly rehoming people, rapidly getting them into permanent homes, but that problem is still going to exist, isn't it? Very complex needs for people.
Yes, support services will continue to be critical for lots of people, but what's really important about rapid rehousing is that people are able to settle in what could be their permanent home as quickly as possible. We want to see much less reliance on that short-term emergency accommodation, much less reliance on hostels, so that people don't have to go through lots of different placements, and that they can move into a settled accommodation as soon as possible. But you're right, Andrea, that continued support and multi-agency support will be absolutely critical to this.
A pivotal time to make these decisions. Katie Dalton, thank you.